Hey gang, Luke here, on the ground at COP29 with Frankie and Tennant.
Hello.
We're enduring what's turning out to be a fairly interminable wait for the opening plenary to resume here in the Nizami Hall at COP29.
That's a wait that's just easing us back into what the COP experience is always like.
Yes, sitting around waiting for things to happen for a really long time.
So we thought we'd make the most of the opportunity to give you a little on-the-ground update from COP29. And why don't we start with the vibe? We've been wandering around the pavilions over the course of the last few hours. What have you picked up around the grounds?
Well, I mean, this is definitely a smaller COP than last year's in Dubai, which I think we'd heard that over 100,000 people had registered for. This feels of a similar scale to the previous one to that.
Yeah, at Sharm el Sheikh.
At Sharm el Sheikh, which was still enormous. Like, we're still talking about, 40,000 people, something like that.
Yeah.
But this is being held at the stadium in Baku, and it's like what they've done is co-opt some of the infrastructure within the stadium ring itself, and then put in place a lot of temporary, tent structures that are heated very well, might we say.
A little too well at times.
Haven't needed our jackets in much of the venue so
Frankie
far.
has thoughts about the HVAC.
And I would,
On
wouldn't
brand.
I? Very on brand. And so, it's cool to see the pavilions are all in the one spot. So
Yeah.
it's a bit more concentrated. So there's definitely a lot of buzz.
Yep.
We just spent the morning walking around, getting across all the programs for the pavilions that are likely to have really interesting events. And that's looking nice and busy, but most things aren't kicking off from, basically from tomorrow. There's a few having opening events today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interaction. Everybody's very interested. It's last year was a bit alienating with every pavilion in its own separate building.
Yeah.
So being all in one somewhat hot, loud, crowded space is actually really good.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest questions coming into this COP is would there be a pall over proceedings because of many people being flummoxed by the outcome of the US election and what it would mean for particularly climate policy and global climate policy? What have you two been picking up as you've been chatting to people over the course of day one?
Well, everybody is keen to know what it's all going to mean in the end, but largely people are getting on with business here.
Yep.
Yeah.
The US Centre was a little plain and a little quiet.
Yeah.
The China Pavilion was a vast riot of colour and movement and active talks going on, but it's all still happening here so far.
So, we should talk about some of the things that are top of mind here at COP29 and
Money.
Money. Yep.
Where's the money? Show me the money.
Which money? From whom? For what? When?
Yep.
How much?
All very good questions. We don't have answers yet though, but that's all code for. The big hot ticket item for this COP is on the new
Collective
quantified goal,
The
on
NCQG.
right? So this goes to how are developed countries, depending on how you define that, providing finance and support to developing countries to do mitigation, but also adaptation.
And maybe loss and damage?
Maybe connected to the loss and damage fund, which was agreed back in Sharm el Sheikh. So I think on one of the last podcasts we recorded, we read a paper produced by the OECD, which said that actually we met the existing goal of $100 billion a year back in 2022.
Yep.
Again, with some asterisks about how you define that. But I guess the tenure for that goal is coming to an end, and that from next year onwards we need to be working towards a new goal. So that 100 billion is basically the floor for ambition, right?
Yep.
So we should only be looking at more than that. And And I think certainly what I've picked up, even just from doing the rounds today at the pavilions, is that adaptation and the focus on that is really only increasing. Certainly from the presence of certain organisations here and the focus of some of the events I've seen on the schedule as well.
And a very strong push from a bunch of the NGOs to shift the focus to grants rather than finance, which will meet some resistance from the developed countries here.
Yeah, it's hard to get to truly colossal numbers just with a focus on grants, but you've got to ask if a focus largely on loans, including even loans with minimal concessionality, how much help that is actually providing beyond what would have been available on a commercial basis anyway. So there's a lot to the arguments of all sides, which is what makes this the big, hard, difficult topic for this COP, the big agenda item. Although there are some other tricky things around the margins too.
And of course the agenda item that is being shepherded through and co-chaired by none other than Chris Palmer.
That's right.
Indeed.
And it will be interesting to see whether there is any sort of flow and impact from the US election result on the way that the US presents in or is viewed in those negotiations.
Yeah. What do they feel that they can commit to, and how seriously does anybody take those commitments?
So there's also, obviously, the perennial, Article 6.
Oh yes. The reason we're sitting here on our butts waiting for some things to happen.
Because there was a shock power play early in the opening plenary where, what happened?
The president of the COP indicated that he was looking for an early win and hoping to just gavel through a decision on Article 6, which basically would have noted that the things that didn't get agreed by the COP on Article 6.4, the new global market mechanism, last year, had been basically solved in the meantime by the body that's been established to manage that market, and the COP could just say, good job, well done, supervisory body, but don't forget we're still in charge, and if we choose to make a big thing out of it and throw our weight around, we could, but we're not, is the draft decision that he has put forward. And there are consultations going on because maybe actually most parties will agree to this, but maybe a couple won't.
Well, it's clearly not going very much to schedule, right? I think they paused the opening plenary this morning. I think that kicked off around 11.
Yep.
So there seems to be two things under discussion. One is that power play, and the other is there's a fight over the agenda, and where certain things sit in the agenda.
And one thing in particular appears to be at issue in that, which is whether there's going to be an agenda item about carbon border adjustment mechanisms.
So it is indicative of how excited he is about this topic, because this agenda item would be about how bad CBAMs are. And
I just like it when it gets talked about.
Yeah. All CBAM news is good CBAM news, according to one T. Reid.
Let's see if I can characterise this appropriately, Tennant. I think there's a bunch of developing countries that see the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism as, closing down trade.
To them, yes. They have not yet accepted their saviour CBAM in their heart, and they've got quite a fearful approach to it.
Yep.
And so they would like, there's other things they're worried about too in the trade arena, they would like there to be an agenda item about unilateral climate-related trade measures. This was discussed last year, and that didn't make it on the agenda, did it? Well, it sort of did. They parked it under the global stocktake.
Yeah.
and they had, in the end, in the final cover decision, a bit of text where they reiterated the importance of some commitments that were already made under the World Trade Organization. And that was like, essentially, we're not going to do bad things in trade, and people shouldn't do bad things around disguised restraints on trade and discriminating against countries under the guise of climate-related measures. And the nature of that text was such that developing countries could say, yeah, you shouldn't, and developed countries could say, that's right, and we're not. And everybody could get on with their lives. But there's an attempt to have more this year, and well, it currently says 5 o'clock this is all going to get that going again. That's in 15 minutes from now. I don't think it's going to happen that soon.
Well, when we sat down here, I don't know, an hour and a quarter ago, it was supposed to be full, and that time slipped. There's every chance it slips again.
That's how things work at your old Copperino.
And I guess the only other thing that's it kind of hangs over the whole event is the fact that in 2025 parties to the Paris Agreement need to submit their nationally determined contributions.
Yep.
Their updated NDCs. We just went through a process at COP29. We did a global stock take. We identified the fact that there was a big gap between where we say we want to be, which is 1.5 degrees of warming, and the actions that nations have currently taken. And so while there's no requirement or necessity for anyone to submit their NDCs at this COP, it is kind of like going to be a running theme through the COP, is that ambitious piece. And we're waiting to see if any nations choose to use it as a bit of a platform to announce their NDCs, to inspire a bit of action around the grounds.
And look, it's only day one, but we haven't seen anything like that come up yet from individual countries choosing to say we're coming out early, strong out of the gates, with ramped up ambition. And I mean, I think, in view of what's happened with in the US with their election result, it probably would be like a timely thing and good for the process if you did see some ambition from other countries, maybe ones that you would expect to step up and show leadership, as we did as we experienced last time, right, when the US bowed out of Paris for the first Trump presidency. And really at that time it was states like the EU that really stepped in and led ambition, as well as some of those other countries in the global north. I'm particularly interested to see how China might behave in this context as well.
Yeah, well, they were very clear last year that they were going to announce their next NDC and an update to their 2030 NDC in 2025. And I don't think they're going to accelerate the bulldozer. I think it's going to keep trundling towards 2025. That's actually a pretty negative simile, isn't it? But I think they're going to do that. UK is thought to be coming out with quite a large target number for 2035 pretty soon. We'll see who else. It's a complicated thing coming up with a one best number for your economy, and when the world's largest economy veers off into both familiar and unfamiliar territory, maybe people are going to take a little longer to stroke their chins about that one best number for them.
All right, well, there you go. Sets the table for the next couple of weeks. We'll be back in the next day or two to reveal, did an agenda get agreed? Was there a shock decision on Article 6? Did Tennant get CBAM on the agenda?
You'd love to claim credit for that, wouldn't you?
Only time will tell.
Yep.
We'll be back in the next day, 2 days, something like that.
Yep.
See you soon.
Bye.